Yes. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for this Morris Block lecture. I'm Dawn Horton. I am the Network Manager of the Schools Health and Wellbeing Improvement Research Network, which we shorten to SHINE for obvious reasons. And by way of context to this, before properly introducing our invited guest speaker, I'm going to just give a little bit of context to how this came about. So for those of you that don't know anything about SHINE, it's a network of nearly 800 schools across Scotland that is really an infrastructure to engage, to facilitate engagement and knowledge exchange between schools, educationalists and health researchers. And over the last 5 years, we've been able to grow this network and these engagements. And one of the sort of defining moments, I would say, really, was when we actually had 3 seconded teachers working alongside us. And so we had a very valuable, live, immersive knowledge exchange and engagement period with those schools over 6 months. And while we were able to, as a research team, we were able to gain valuable insights into the perspectives of schools and their engagement with research, and particularly health research, it obviously worked the other way, that those 3 teachers were really embraced being in the School of Health and Wellbeing, and being able to attend things like the Morris Block lectures, read the newsletters, and generally absorb a lot of the health research that was going on. And so the conversations that ensued were really valuable from that. There's actually one of the teachers who's with us today, Lynn Alexander, who was seconded, who gives us a wave so we can see her, who nominated Suzanne to come and present as part of the Morris Block lecture series, and you'll see just why, hopefully, that is so fitting. So obviously, with the network being all about engagement and knowledge exchange, Suzanne has worked very much along this theme. And so I'm very pleased to introduce to you today Dr. Suzanne Zeedyk, who has been working since 1993 as a developmental psychologist, with a particular interest in the ability of humans from birth to connect and to form relationships. And when Suzanne started on this journey, she was really interested in the impact of trauma and what that impact has on relationships and connections, but also looking at that development through the life course. However, in 2011, Suzanne decided to step away from her academic post at the University of Dundee to establish an independent training enterprise, which has the aim of helping the public to understand the importance of emotional connection for human health and happiness. And in today's lecture, Suzanne is going to talk about some of the experiences on this journey from the academic world into that very public engagement sector. So working internationally with large organisations, but also working nationally with Scottish schools to foster an awareness of the importance of connection, compassion, and resilience. And the core aspiration for Suzanne is really to empower the decision makers who take care of children and make sure that they have the understanding of the importance of relationships and the science of connection. So in today's lecture, Suzanne is going to share some stories of her engagement journey with schools and early years settings. And she's going to consider some of the barriers on that journey of implementing research knowledge in that sector, as well as obviously the many successes. So I'm now delighted to hand over to Dr. Suzanne Zeedyk, who will present on the topic of the science of connection real-life stories of school transformation as a result of public engagement efforts.
Well, a lovely, warm, formal introduction. It's really interesting to hear one story pulled back to one. Because it is true. In 2011, I stepped away from an academic career, which I had prepared for my entire life. I had wanted to be an academic since I probably first walked through the door of a school, because I had discovered that you could stay in school your whole life. And it's really interesting to have decided to step away from that in order to try to take the science that I love to the wider public. So when we put this together, we came up with this lovely long title, The Science of Connection, Real Life Stories of School Transformation as a Result of Public Engagement Efforts, because we wanted to try to give all of you a sense of what you might be coming to. But I have discovered in the time that I have been working with the public that I'm never satisfied with just a single title. Because it turns out that if you bring other words, other frames, then you come to the same material, but from a different point. And that brings more people in if you come from different starting points. So we could have called today this, much more simply, we could have called it How the Science of Connection Helps. Or we could have called it this, Why the Science of Connection Can Feel Tricky. Because when I left the university, and more on that in just a moment, because I know some of you said to me when I was going around early that you wanted to know a bit about that. When I left the university in 2011 to try to reach the public, I thought that as a scientist, I just had one key challenge, and that was to figure out how to translate the science, which often has words that are scary for the public, or ideas and arrangements that are confusing for them, or graphs that many people don't feel confident about reading. I thought my big challenge was that I was going to help them to understand the science. And what I have discovered in the, 13 years now that I have been working with the public, I discovered that I was wrong. That is not my biggest challenge. My biggest challenge, since I talk about infant development and the impact of human relationships, my biggest challenge is to help them with how they feel about what science has learned. Because when you truly understand how important relationships are, if I am successful in helping them understand how the science of connection works and how it helps and what it means for relationships with babies, or for your relationships with your students in schools, or what it means for your clients in a care home, what it means for inmates in prison, if I am successful in helping you to really understand that, then I have come to realize that people are kicked into guilt and uncertainty, shame, and chaos. And so part of my job, and indeed part of all our jobs, I think, as researchers, is to think about how you support people with their feelings about that knowledge. And I didn't really understand that when I was a full-time researcher at the University of Dundee. So I find myself thinking a lot now about why the science of connection often feels tricky for people and what I can do to help with them. But I could also call this morning this. I could have called it Putting Science to Work in School Classrooms and Cultures, because I am delighted. I've got lots of stories about how I have been able to help with this. And of course, I'm just part of a larger group of people who are trying to do that. But if I'd called it anything, I think I would have called it this. I would have called it Stories of Schools Being Courageous. Because I think if you are a school who is trying to do anything along the relational journey, or an attachment-led journey, or a trauma-informed journey, or an ACE-aware journey, or a nurture-informed journey, whatever you want to call it, I think that if you're trying to do that, it takes courage. Because people have opinions about what you're doing. And some people will think that you aren't doing enough. Some people will think that you should be doing something harsher. Some people will think that we should go back to the way it once was, right? So trying to do any of this, I think, is courageous. And that's what I said, please come in and join us. That's what I said this morning on Twitter when I talked about the fact I was coming to talk to you. So that the schools that I'm going to talk about would be able to feel proud about the fact that you are here listening to their story. Okay. So there's my name. There's what I call it, the science of human connection. There's my logo. When I was at the university, I didn't have a logo. Here's me at the University of Dundee. That's my office. I was there for nearly 20 years. And I loved it. I've already said I had wanted to be an academic my whole life. I loved doing basic research. I know the feeling, what it's like when you get the email that says that they will publish your paper. I loved it. And yet over time, I came to realize something that I hadn't fully understood to begin with, just because I knew all this stuff that I thought was fascinating about infant development, about the importance of relationships. I had access to the cutting edge research, the latest discoveries and publications. I understood the classic research and how those fit together. I don't think I fully understood that the public didn't have access to that. People don't have access to that stuff because they don't have a subscription to a journal. And if they found an article they really wanted, they won't have 30 quid in their budget to buy that article. Even if they did, they often may not understand the language. And they would feel scared or overwhelmed by trying to figure out how a journal article works. So and they often don't have time. Who's got time? When you're in charge of a school, or you're in charge of a classroom of 30 children, or you're in charge of 6 sessions of a classroom of 30 children, who's got time to stay up to speed with the latest research? So it became a really interesting question for me. If I studied babies, human relationships, and the people out there who dealt with babies and children and grown-ups who were once babies didn't have access to that knowledge, increasingly, I kept asking, what am I doing this for? It became a moral question for me. If the people who dealt with babies didn't have reliable access to it, then it meant that I was talking to my other colleagues who were fascinated by this, but that there were people who I just thought deserved access to it that weren't getting it. And so eventually it came down to a real choice for me. Would I stay in my office in a setting that I loved, or would I try to see if I could put a lot more effort into speaking to the public? And so I tried doing both of that. I spent a lot of my spare time and my Saturdays as an academic speaking to groups, but I don't have to tell you that there's only so much time, and I couldn't craft enough time to spend with the public. And so in 2011, I took a really big step. I took voluntary severance, and I stepped out into the wider public to see if I could speak to groups like this, who I already knew were interested because I had been receiving invitations from them, to see if I could translate what I now call the science of connection for the wider public. I'll be really honest with you. I was terrified. I had panic attacks. I woke up for a period of time in the middle of the night with panic attacks. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know how you earned money. I didn't know if I could earn money. I didn't know what happened to my scientific reputation as an academic if I now was no longer producing papers. Maybe I would be able to continue to do that, but would there be enough time to do that? I often don't elaborate on that part of the story, but because almost all of you are academics, please come in. You might be interested in that part. But what I knew, because I had been talking to groups like this, is that there was an interest in it, if I could figure out how to translate it. And I could figure out how you paid your own taxes if you weren't part of a university system. And so what I have found is now in the 13 years, I have found that people in all these different groups want to talk about attachment, trauma, ACEs, nurture, relationships, intersubjectivity. If I can find ways to frame that so that they feel included in that conversation. I show them this slide, right? So that if they're in prisons, or they're in schools, or they're in parents groups, that they can feel themselves to be part of a much wider conversation. Very often groups don't know that. If you're part of parents and you're interested in how to care for your baby, you don't know that people in prisons are interested in that. Or if you're part of a school that is struggling, you don't know that musicians are interested in that. So when you can find ways to say there's a big conversation going on that people want to be part of, at the center of which is connection, then it helps people to feel braver and more curious and more interested and to step forward. And what I find is that I now know I come back to 3 key themes, always. I come back to talking about how babies arrive already connected to other people. We did not used to know that. So in the 1970s, the developmental psychologists, the infant psychologists here in Britain, as well as in the US and other places, but the energy in Britain was massive in helping people to understand the new data that we were getting that said babies come into the world with a brain that is already wired for the rhythm of their mother's heartbeat, or with a brain that is expecting to find 2 eyes and a mouth in an orientation like this and not like this. What does it mean if you come wired to expect that? What does it come if your stress system is already keeping track of the responsiveness of your parent, and that is becoming built into your own biological systems? It's profound, but we didn't used to know that. So I try to help people to understand the babies come into the world already connected, what that means. And then I build on that by talking about the fact that we now know that connection, a sense of connection to other people, shapes brain development and body development, stress system. And if connection shapes that, then so does disconnection. So by the time you're a year old, you've basically got in your body the rhythms of an attachment style. Before you can walk or talk, you have discovered how responsive other people are, and it's been built into the neural pathways of your brain. I think that's remarkable. I think that's profound, endlessly fascinating, and unnerving if you're the parent of a 1-year-old. Or you're an underpaid early years practitioner who's on minimum wage. And I just showed up in your nursery and said, alongside parents, you're the most important people in the world. And you're the most important people in the country. You're the most influential people in the country because you're working with children in a time in which the brains develop more rapidly than they ever will again. So how do I help people to think about those 2 ideas and then put them together with this 3rd one, which is that society suffers if babies don't feel connected, and indeed if grown-ups don't feel connected. So then you start to have an implication for the whole of society. And although I have been talking about those 3 themes the whole time I've been working with the public, it never turned out to be more true or illustrative than it did during COVID. What most people suffered from during the pandemic was the fact that they were cut off from the people that they loved, the people that they worked with and that they liked, their social rhythms, the ability to say goodbye to people who died that they loved. And if we cannot honor that, if we cannot honor the consequences of that, then we can't actually recover from COVID. We might rush on, but there will be unresolved grief and loss that we could have paid attention to if we honor the importance of connection. And I think our really young children are carrying many more emotional consequences of COVID than lots of people will realize. And so will our teenagers, but maybe we realize some more of that than we do for the youngest ones. There are all sorts of implications. So those are the 3 themes that I'm forever talking around, and I can talk for weeks. Please laugh at that. Because Dawn said I can't talk for weeks. Dawn said I need to finish about 1:45 so that we have some time for questions. But which I will aim to do. But I just wanted to give you a sense of how broad the conversation is, or can be, around core research knowledge that the public wants to know about. So this is what I thought I would touch a bit on. I thought I would make sure that you know that there is a movement around ACEs, trauma, attachment, because I find it really inspiring. And So I want to be sure that you know that is happening. And then the key thing I want to do is tell you about lots of the schools that I have worked with who are taking action on that. If I leave enough time, I'll talk about why there is resistance to some of that. And I might skip that depending on how time goes. But I want to end on why this takes courage. So that's my vision. That sound okay? Good. Those are the PowerPoint slides I put together. So I'm glad if that sounded okay. And I just want to remind you, I know you've heard Dawn say that, but if what SHINE is aiming to do is to transform the health and well-being outcomes for young people in Scotland through high quality, school-based health improvement research and data-driven innovation, I want to tell you that one of the key ideas that I work with now is that evidence on its own is not enough to drive change. I think as a scientist, I sort of thought it was. That I thought that if we have enough evidence, that will help, people will look at the evidence and then they will change practice or policy or culture. I have now learned that that is not what happens. And I hope that if I talk more about that, about why evidence is not enough to drive change, that it helps us to see what else we need to pay attention to. And I have become convinced in the time that I've been doing this, that we really need to think more about resistance, to understand where it comes from. We almost need to theorize it, and that we need to think about the power of courage. And we need to put that together with evidence. So if you're working with mental health in schools and you are trying to find ways to make scientific research land and have impact and create change, I think we're more powerful if we understand that evidence on its own doesn't drive change. And if we think more about resistance, we understand some more about what is going on. Okay, so let me make sure that you know that there's an ACEs movement going on in the country that looks like this. So this image was taken in 2018. This is a big event that I helped to organize. This is what 2,000 people in a room together look like. And they came together under what we came to call ACE Aware Scotland, meaning adverse childhood experiences. I find this image remarkable. It hangs in my office on the days that I feel down and discouraged. 2,000 people came together in a room to understand more about childhood suffering, about childhood trauma. They didn't have to. Nobody required them to. Sometimes their local authority paid for it. Sometimes their school paid for it. Lots of people I know ask for as a Christmas present from their family members. 2,000 people came together in a room to think about childhood trauma. How did that happen? Did it end in 2018? And the answer to that is no. This was June 2019. There'd been such energy around ACE Aware Scotland that people wanted to do more things. And so myself and my colleagues, the key colleague is an organization called Tigers, who offers apprenticeships to young people. We pulled this together. That's 1,900 people in a room. And then COVID came, and then we did things online. But what I can tell you is that every year since 2018, we have offered a large scale event. And this is last year's. This is September 2023 in a big hotel in Glasgow, where we packed the chairs in, this time to listen to Gabor Mate. People wanted to know. There is a real energy in Scotland to want to know this. And if Tigers, so Tigers, the T here is for Tigers. Tigers is they didn't have to do this. They offer apprenticeships to young people. They're funded by Skills Development Scotland. There's about 150 of them in the organization. They didn't have to do this. They did this because once they understood this information, they thought other people deserved to know as well. Connected Baby, that's my organization. There's 4 of us at Connected Baby. We didn't have to do this, except that we think people deserve to be able to know. And I'm just trying to give you some images that give you a sense of what happens when there's a public hunger for this kind of information. Okay, so I hope, in fact, can I ask, how many of you are aware of this happening? Look, put your hand up high. Look around the room. That's about 1/3 of you. Yeah. I'm delighted. Can I ask how many of you did not know this was happening? Put your hands up, please. From the room. That's about 2/3 of you. Yay. And I'm glad I'm telling you. Okay, because that means there's a whole lot of energy out there that you can draw on for what you are wanting to do, and you might not even know that. Okay, right. So I hope you might be thinking, okay, how did this get started? How is there an interest, a public interest in this? I put it down to this film. Okay, I can tell you a much fuller story. I actually think Scotland's shift, the wider shift, starts in 2005 with the police and the violence reduction unit. But the big explosion starts in the summer of 2017. That is no time ago at all. And in the summer of 2017, this film came, an American film made by a film production company called KPJR. And they made a film about the science of adverse childhood experiences, or you might think of that as the science of childhood trauma. For me, attachment led is exactly the same. I use those language all interchangeably. Scotland schools tend to use the word nurture, and there are nurture principles, but for me, that gets chucked in all to the same as well. Okay, so the language of adverse childhood experience, and it's tied to building the biology of resilience, got captured in this 1-hour film. And myself and a colleague named Tina Hendry, who at one point was a police officer, she was doing the same thing I was, trying to help people to know. We both said, okay, well, they're releasing that film in America. So we wrote to the producers and said, how do we get that to Scotland? Turned out it's being shown in London. And we're like, it's being shown in London? Right, definitely. How do we get it to Scotland? And so we were just going to have one showing of this film in a little cinema in Glasgow. And when we put it on Facebook, interest exploded. And people got mad at us because they couldn't get a ticket. And they said, could you not show in Edinburgh? If you can show in Glasgow, can you not show in Edinburgh? And we went, okay, I guess we could go find a cinema in Edinburgh then. I didn't know at that point that you could hire a cinema. I'd never hired a cinema before. I didn't know you could do that. It turns out you can. Then you just like hope that you've set the right amount for tickets, and then hope enough people buy tickets to cover the cost of the cinema. We had no funding. There was no external funding. We were taking a punt. It turned into this. In the summer of 2017, interest exploded. And we took that film to 25 different communities, and we could have taken it to others, but we were out of energy at that point. And you can see that almost all of them are sold out. I mean, Elgin's a tiny community. They wanted a screening. The biggest screening was held in Falkirk. Yeah, we caught the ferry to Arran one afternoon. Okay, so all of these communities wanted a chance to see this hour-long film because they saw other people talking about it. And that film is all about relationships and how the trauma of childhood has a biological impact. So it's a translation of the research around adverse childhood experiences. I think this film, and I'm going to show you the trailer of it here in just a second, I think this film changed Scotland. There will be lots of people who've not seen this film. There will be lots of people who've forgotten it was out there because COVID had an impact on the energy that was building. But without this film, there would not have been the big ACE Aware Nation conferences that we've had, because when enough people had seen the film, they wanted more. And I don't think as a scientist, I had thought enough about the power of other kinds of tools like film to help to translate research findings. So can I ask, how many of you have seen this film? Look around the room so you get a sense. That's 4 of you. How many of you have heard about it but never seen it? 1, 2, 4 more, 5. How many of you haven't a clue what I'm talking about because you've never heard of it? Look around the room. That's most of you. Isn't that fascinating? Okay, I think this film and the energy around it changed our country because it tipped the conversation that lots of the public was able to have. So this is how this, film team put together the telling of a story about some core biological research about the importance of relationships.
Okay, great.
Great timing. I think it's interesting to see science translated into a film context, which I think the basic scientists that I know and that I have spent my career working with, we don't often think about this, and we might not have the skills to do this, and we might not have partners. But I think about it a lot now because I have seen the impact that has on the wider public. And although that uses the language of trauma and adverse childhood experiences and biology and stress, for me, it goes back to the core thing that I did research on for all those years. This idea that babies come into the world already connected. And so I often use this image that you have seen. This is Daniel and his mom, Kelly. Daniel was born during COVID. And in this image, he's 30 minutes old. And I have this image because Kelly and Daddy Brian, who's taking the photograph, have been to enough of my events as a set of very ordinary parents that they feel really confident that they understand connection and how it works and why it's important and what to pay attention to. They're really proud. And so when Daniel was born during COVID, which was very stressful and scary for families, they were so excited to catch this image of Daniel looking straight into his mom's eyes. At 30 minutes old, they sent it to me and they went, Suzanne, look, we have captured connection. We just wanted to share it with you. And I said, guys, brilliant. Can I have the photograph, please, to show to lots of people? Okay, if Kelly had understood that tens of thousands of people, literally, were going to see her image over the course of the next few years, she might not have agreed to that because now I know she worries that she's not looking at her best. And yet it helps to know this is a real child with a real adult, with a real family in Scotland who's illustrating these scientific insights. Because I spent all my time thinking, how can I help people to understand the importance that you arrive already connected? Well, sometimes I think you don't need to hear from me and you don't, images are pretty good, but sometimes I think maybe showing babies doing their thing is a better way to do this. So I'm going to show you this video. This is a research video. It comes from a study published in 2013 by Vasi Reddy and her colleagues at the University of Portsmouth. This shows a really ordinary moment of a 3-month-old baby being picked up by her mom. It happens for babies multiple times a day, and we've simply videoed it. We've done two things. We put the baby on a pressure mat, so those little sensory cables measure and can assess a baby's muscle movement. And we asked the mom to just slow down. And other than that, we just said, please pick up your baby as you will. Okay. This baby in this video, there's no sound. It's scratchy. It's not fancy. Is 3 months old. So let me show you what that looks like. Okay, so the mom stands up, puts her hands. She picks the baby up. The end. At one level, it doesn't look fascinating at all until you can break it down and you have a chance to think about what you're seeing. So here's a 3-month-old baby. Mom stands up. Baby's arms and legs are already going. Mom moves a bit further. Baby's arms have gone out straight. Baby's legs are raised. Now the baby is holding. And because she slowed it down, the baby's like, I'm ready, I'm ready, I'm ready. Up as well. A baby who's 3 months old has just gotten strong enough. Neck muscles are just strong enough to hold up that head. This is an ordinary human baby who is predicting the future. They have made a prediction about someone else's intentions in relation to themselves. And they have moved their body in accord with the future that they predict. Relationships are built into our biology. The mother has not yet touched the baby. The baby has prepared for what she thinks is about to happen. It is profound. And so if we can appreciate that babies can do that, it lets us then start to ask, what happens if the baby is disappointed? What happens if the baby tries to make predictions about her parents, but she's often disappointed? And that is the expectation of other people that will be built into her biology and to the neural pathways in her brain. What if the baby predicts something scary? What if the baby can't predict because the adult is too chaotic? All of that will be built into the baby's biology and their stress system in their brain. And if we really get that, we can either think about it with hope or with anxiety, because we start to realize there must be all sorts of babies out there who experience a lot of disappointment or a lot of chaos. But this baby has experienced affirmation. Yeah, mom picks her up. How early can babies do that? That's a 3-month-old. Can babies do that at 2 months old? Mom stands above the baby, speak to her. Where are the baby's eyes? Mom's hands go out. 2 months old. That baby is not yet strong enough to hold up their neck. And yeah, the baby has read an intention in the adult and has responded to the prediction she makes of what another person is going to do. That's attachment. That's connection. That's intersubjectivity. That's biology. That's trauma. That's adverse childhood experiences. How do I help people to understand how core our sociality goes so that we pay more attention to what children need and what their emotions are and what their experiences of other people are? For the people who follow me on social media and who ask me to come in, the thing I think I have become best known for is saber-tooth tigers and teddy bears. So I didn't even think to bring a copy of it, but I have a little book that is intentionally little with lots of photographs called Saber-tooth Tigers and Teddy Bears, The Connected Baby Guide to Attachment. And so lots of people will tell me, well, they'll use that language. It's a saber-tooth tiger moment. Oh, Suzanne, I saw a teddy bear moment today. And I could have chosen to break that down and tell you today about, all I'm going to do is flash the cover of the book at you. What I can tell you is that the metaphor for me of the scary moments that children experience that get built into their biology are saber-tooth tiger moments. And the moments of calm and rest and safety of teddy bear moments. And what I can tell you is that's been remarkably impactful to use that language that's an analogy. But I couldn't have used it at university. If I talked about saber-tooth tiger moments and teddy bear moments, my students would have put it in their essays. And then they would have been failed because it didn't sound sciencey enough. Indeed, I have had scientific colleagues who are not sure they're happy with me using this language because it doesn't sound sciencey enough. It sounds a bit twee. So there was a period in which I thought, do I have to get approval from somebody to say this? Is there an ethics committee I need to go to? What I have discovered is you can talk about knowledge in any way you like. Some people will talk about it in ways that are actually unhelpful and undermining. That was a surprise to me. But because I have found that this is useful to parents when their child is having a meltdown and as does, I use the language of saber-tooth tigers and teddy bears rather than the sympathetic division of the central nervous system and the parasympathetic division of the central nervous system, which makes up the stress system. I can track it back, but I now think a lot about the language that I use as a way to help tempt the public into what I'm talking about. Okay. So one of the things that I am really proud of in Scotland is that we have been able to think about what kind of country do we want to be? What would it mean if the whole of the country, if we were an ACE-aware nation, where the whole of the country could understand the importance of relationships? But when we talk about ACEs and trauma, we've been really good at Scotland at understanding that that is underpinned by relationships and not just what happens to you, but who is there to help you with it. And indeed, we are planning our conference for 24 and 25, and we have some international speakers coming, and we will say to them, we're proud in Scotland that our thinking about trauma is underpinned by an understanding of relationships and attachment. Okay, if you want to know more about that journey, you can download this paper from the ACE-aware Scotland website. So this is an academic paper that I wrote to try to tell that story along with my colleague Simon Partridge, and then we decided to make it available to the public. That in itself was an interesting journey, so that people would understand the journey that Scotland has gone on. And it will tell you more about some of these things I pointed to. I just want to say one more thing. Not everybody's in favor of this. So in the moment when we hosted that first big conference, really proud of our ability to pull that off, was when the first big article came out in October 2018, where some people said they were worried by it. And other people said, maybe this is a cause for worry rather than celebration. And other people ask, were we just suggesting light bulb moments or and silver bullets for actually social ills? Okay, so what I'm trying to hint toward is these conversations are important. But when you move academic conversations about how to think about research and theory and methodology into the wider public, I'll be very honest. Sometimes the academics who have ended up part of that conversation have scared the public because the public doesn't always understand those theoretical debates and the questions about methodology in a research article. And I hadn't planned to say this, but I will. Sometimes the researchers became part of that conversation. There was an arrogance to the way they talked about their specialties. And the things that they understood that they assumed the public knew, and many of the public don't know. So as academics, I think we need to bring questions and humility in thinking about how do we get this information out to the public, because if the public doesn't have access to it, what are we doing it for? That has been a very interesting journey for me to think about, that sometimes the enthusiasm of myself and my colleagues could lend itself to a kind of arrogance if I'm not curious enough about what other groups know and don't know. And I can come back to that if you like. Because what I want to be sure to do, I'm keeping my eye on the time, I just want to show you schools, because of the SHINE program, that have engaged with this language and that have been inspired by it. So I brought along images of lots of the schools that I have been asked to come and work for and with. This is Banesford Primary in Falkirk. That's their head teacher, Suzanne McCafferty, and she's giving a presentation in that image where she's talking about the behavior policy that they used to have at Banesford. And in that talk, she brought that behavior policy and she literally, in front of the audience, ripped it in half. And she said, when I came to understand this, I understood that I was harming the children with the behavior policy that I wrote. We ripped it up and we now have a relationship agreement. They rewrote on the basis of their understanding of trauma and attachment and ACEs. They rewrote a different kind of policy about what you did with children's behavior. This is Clydebank High, not far from here. Clydebank High took their energy around this their excitement around this knowledge, and they held a nurture festival. It took them courage. They thought, we're going to share it. 600 people turned up in Clydebank High to understand what they had done with this information with their students, how they had applied it. This is Millamains Primary. That's a worry monster. They have a worry monster, a little tiny worry monster that sits on a board for children to put their worries into their mouth if they don't want to tell the teacher. What I loved about Millamays, this school's in Dundee, is that they understood that that had a biological impact on their children. It just wasn't a nice thing. Being able to tell someone and trusting that the monster is interested and the adults who then engage with the monster is interested, has a biological impact on children's ability to be present in school, and that shapes their learning. This is Lindbergh Primary. Lindbergh Primary puts scientific concepts on the walls of their school before you get through the front door. Here they are talking about the regulate, relate, reason image. That's by Bruce Perry, regulate, relate, reason, as a way to relate to children when they are distressed. That's just over here. You can't see that in the image. That's them talking about what goes in their school windows on Twitter. Bruce Perry, big scientist, is in the windows of a school in Fife. This is Paducah East Primary. They changed the language of challenging behavior, which is very common in schools. They now call it distressed behavior. And that was picked up by the press with the idea that a naughty child is trying to tell you something. Some people aren't comfortable about the idea that we should get interested in children's naughtiness in a deeper way. So their willingness to talk about their language of distressed behavior is actually a really radical act. This is Falkirk High. Falkirk High hosted the biggest screening of resilience in that entire tour. There were I think there were 250 odd people in the audience in their gym hall. They did that because they thought other people deserved to know what they were coming to understand. This is Rossmeath Primary. That's over in Argyll. This is me at a meeting of the Teddy Bear Council of the schools. The children, because they do particular things with teddy bears, the children can talk about what they're feeling and how they're coping because the teachers thought out ways to help them to do that and were brave enough to use the language of teddy bears, even if it wasn't what the local council was suggesting that they might do. This is Windsor Park Sensory Service. They wanted to have me come in so that they could understand the biological impact of COVID on their students who carry sensory difficulties. This is Kilsyth Academy. Kilsyth Academy had a screening, had a parents' evening where they wanted to share what they were learning, and they understood that when they put out tea and biscuits to welcome the parents, it produces oxytocin and it reduces cortisol to help the parents who were scared to walk through the doors of their school. Parents' evenings are held all over the country. There are some parents who are terrified, and they might get through the door, but they can't calm down enough to hear what the teacher is saying. And there are some parents who are so terrified they can't get through the door. And if you're a calm parent who confidently can walk through the door, you might not have any other idea that some parents are so terrified. So I love that Kilsyth Academy understood that their tea and biscuits, they understood that through a biological lens. This is Burnside Primary. They showed that film to their parents. We had a gym hall full of parents. In fact, that was probably the moment in which I realized how threatening some of the information in that film could feel if you didn't understand the intention of the person who'd asked you to come and see it. We needed parents to understand they weren't being blamed, that we were trying to figure out how we could improve relationships all the way around. Here's Carnoustie High. Carnoustie High is about to have a screening of that film for their staff next week because their staff didn't get to see it. This is Shawlands Academy. They too had a screening of that film for their staff to make sure that they understood. This is St. Paul's Roman Catholic High School. They wanted an in-depth discussion of how ACEs work and how this is a model. This is a scientific model. Lots of people don't know what scientific model means. So by the end of that session, we had particularly staff, the cleaners, the janitors, understanding a scientific model. This is Erskine Stewart's Melville School. They have a very impressive building. Lots of times we think about the state schools and we have no idea what the independent schools are doing. When independent schools want to think about the impact of what a tie feels like, and they want to talk about policies that are not what what all independent schools might be talking about, they are really brave. This is Torrance Primary. They understood the biology of getting community members to knit teddies that they took out to their children during COVID. This is Allen's Primary. This is Kirkentilic High. This is Dane Primary. This is Florida Stevenson Primary. This is Bellarmine High. I'm just trying to give you a sense that there are lots of schools out there who have been inspired by this information to try to act on science. And I just wanted to end with this. These are the head teachers of 3 schools in West Lothian who developed what they called teddy bear policies. And they wrote up teddy bear policies. Their local authority was okay with that. One of their teddies named Furball was named amongst TES's, which is the Times Educational Supplement, the key education magazine, was named amongst, their teddy was named amongst the top 10 people in Scotland that year. They could talk about how they brought a trauma-informed, biologically informed approach to their school. It was all really celebratory. And then the Daily Mail got hold of the story. Daily Mail tried to embarrass those schools about how they were spending their PEF money on teddy bears. What they really wanted to do was embarrass their local authority. Can I tell you can tell from my voice, I was furious. And can I tell you that the head teachers were not anxious at all? I was more upset than they were. They understood the value of what they were doing, and they were not worried at all by the fact that Daily Mail was trying to humiliate 3 schools who work in communities of terrible deprivation. And they had found a way to help children to increase their attendance and to increase their attainment. And they weren't worried at all about the fact that they were being humiliated from out there. And I actually, by the time I had calmed down, I understood that was an achievement in itself, that we had 3 head teachers that were so confident in their understanding of the science. Okay. There are now, this is a virtual course that has been put together by Policy Hub, which tries to translate that. And I just want to play you a teeny bit about when you're going to convey this information to the wider public now in an online format. Who might you interview? What might you put in? This is now available to schools across the country from Policy Hub Scotland. Well, in this case, this is Brian Kenny, the janitor, who is being interviewed as part of understanding what a trauma-informed culture looks like.
Well, Brian, thank you so much for being on your
I'm just going to pause it there. We don't normally think about that what janitors are doing as having anything to do with trauma-informed practice. But this course puts securing the building and looking after the safety of the children under that lens of trauma-informed or ACE-aware or attachment-led. Okay. When the organizers of this course decided they wanted to do that, a little part of me went, yes, more and more people are able to really think confidently about what a culture looks like. Okay. Now, we've got 5 more minutes left. Has what I said been helpful to you to see? As I flashed all those pictures of schools in front of you. If you want to know more, of course, you can email me and I will send you information about those schools. I put on Twitter every single school and those slides this morning so that those schools would feel proud knowing that I had come to talk to you about them. But I want to end by thinking about resistance and courage, okay? I'm going to skip all the resistance stuff. There's all this fascinating stuff that we could talk about. Because I want to think about courage. It turns out that using any of this information and thinking about what children need takes courage. So this is some of the change that has happened in the school system in Scotland very recently. These are two moms who've driven a campaign to change the availability of deferred entry. So our children start school at 4. All of the developmental information that we now have, the knowledge that we have, says that's too young to have children start in formal schooling. And yet that is still the normal age in Scotland. And although you can defer, there were lots of parents who did not get information about how you went about deferring. Two moms, not researchers, not politicians, not even teachers. It's two moms that have driven a change that lets children now start at an age that is more developmentally appropriate. There's another campaign that's going on the basis of this information. There's a group called Upstart Scotland. They argue that we need a kindergarten stage. So instead of starting formal things even at 4 and 5, we should start at 6, even 7, which is what many European countries do. Okay. And so there is more we could be doing. If you'd asked me right after COVID, we'd have just redone the whole education system right then to start at a more developmentally appropriate time. And I want to really end on almost this slide because it comes back to your questions. This is when we launched the Upstart campaign. There's me. There's Colin Tavarthan, a key researcher. There's Sue Palmer, who leads this campaign, who's a head teacher. And this is what it says on the Upstart Scotland website. Our national launch took place on the 15th of May, 2016, when we built a tower of evidence outside the Scottish Parliament. This is my point. If the evidence was enough, that was 2016. If the evidence was enough, we'd have a kindergarten stage now. But it's now 2024. Bunches of us are still wandering around trying to get a kindergarten stage. So understanding the evidence is not itself enough to drive change, then we need to think more about where does the resistance come from and where's the courage of people like parents and like head teachers and people who want to get together with silly blue balloons in order to drive change. I think we need to think more about where resistance comes from and to theorize that, which is why in summary, I wanted to share with you even briefly the stories of schools that are being courageous. And if we can be aware of what they are doing, then perhaps it creates a pathway that other schools can follow in the pathway of, and that researchers can inquire about where the courage to do that came from, because that's what creates change. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for sharing your journey with us, which has been considerable this afternoon. Thank you so much. We are at 2 o'clock, but if we can have maybe some questions. Do we have any questions?
Hi there, my name is Jason. I'm
Hello, Jason.
Senior lecturer in neurodevelopment.
Brilliant.
In the Centre in probably future names. So I think we're the Centre of Development, Diversity and Resilience.
Brilliant. Okay.
My interest is around the aspects of neurodevelopment and neurodivergence in children. I'm interested in who are communicating with schools about how children are ready-made to interact. Although I always have in the back of my mind that those of us who are autistic or have ADHD traits or neurotypes, etc., will interact perhaps differently, but the same goal.
Yes, agree.
So I'm just wondering, and I guess the reason I'm asking that is because I'm currently developing a project along with Dawn and our colleagues to look at school culture change and how we can help make schools a more neurodevelopmentally friendly environment. Because I guess some of the biggest issues we have now is neurodivergent kids are often absent from school, just not there.
Yep.
So I suppose what I'm asking in a really long way, I'll get to the point eventually, is in terms of resistance to radical change within education and resistance to understanding neurodivergence and how that might impact all of these connectivity things, do you have any advice?
Yes. I find that if you help people to understand that human beings arrive already connected, biologically, neurologically wired for connection, and that includes children who will turn out to be diagnosed as autistic or with ADHD or with Down syndrome or with any label, any group that they might fit in. If we help people to think about, they still arrived connected, and that they have sensory experiences of the world. And the way that people meet those sensory experiences either help children to feel calm and connected or increases their anxiety. That what that does is it helps people to think differently about neurodivergence and also about stress and trauma. Because the core idea that your biology is being shaped by your experience of the world, including other people in the world, is central for me to all of that. And I think that the trauma stuff, because there's so much interest in it, is like a way to get to the neurodivergent stuff. If we understand that what we're dealing with are human beings who are wired for connection. And the place that we get that most clearly is in the infant research, because babies arrive connected, and that's what so much of that research in the 70s was doing. But tons of people just don't know that, so they don't know how to bring it to those questions. And I find it helps people to step into curiosity when I start there. And I hope that many more people will step into it because there's so much interest in trauma. And I use the word biology all the time to help people to do that. And if you then talk about masking, which we ask so many children to do, it then helps people to think about how actually that is really driving stress. If you're asking a child to mask all day long for who they are and what they need. Does that help?
Yeah, no, I think
Right.
it's you as when you talked about increasing the age of children starting school and we were talking about ages change. My personal view is that there needs to be wholesale change. Huge, it's a huge topic, it's a huge area, but how that, yeah, it's just interesting to hear about those events that, one thing catalyzes another and that leads to the culture change, because I think otherwise things get stifled and anxiety around the systems and people just want to keep everything just as it was. Thank you very much for that.
And so if the adults get too anxious that they've got a classroom that they can't deal with, or they don't know what the consequences for children are going to be, or that they don't get to discriminate between the bad children and the good children, the adults start to get overwhelmed and then they can't think creatively because they become fixed. But that needs a whole nother afternoon. Do we have time for one more question?
Any more questions?
Yes.
So yeah, thank you. Really enjoyed that. So I'm interested in many of the examples you gave where people been courageous with some sort of bottom-up approach where they were sort of leaders, parents taking opportunity. So two parts question, what do you think were the drivers mechanisms that allowed that evidence to be landed with those groups of people?
Yes.
But I'm assuming there's also other head teachers where you felt it hasn't landed as well, and they've not been as courageous. So I'm just interested in what was it about those people, those groups, that allowed it to happen?
It's a great question. So you really need leadership to allow a culture to change. So a leader who's interested in these sorts of things can produce a lot of blossom of change really quickly. But there will be leaders who think that what we need is a stricter environment. And there's a whole group within education, often called now research ed, which is arguing for much stricter approaches, that's arguing for an increase in exclusions. So Scotland has reduced exclusions massively. There's now a drive to increase exclusions. The Minister for Education, Jenny Gilruth, has said that she thinks we should look at that. There was a poll, in fact, if I just do this really fast, which these are all the things that I skipped, because teachers are overwhelmed at the moment. There was a poll on Twitter just this week to ask, would you support the return of corporal punishment? Nearly 5,000 people voted. And although, yes, it's true that I think it's 93% of people said no, they would not. The guy who did the thread said this, that means that over 100 people are willing to hit children again I think because the adults are overwhelmed. If you're put in charge of a class for 30, you feel overwhelmed and you feel scared because the children are violent, you want something to keep the group under control. Okay, so there is a big argument. It's part of the reason that I keep talking about relationships, because I think we need to keep that on the agenda. And I think that if we tell the stories of the schools who made change, of the places where you can be part of a community that is talking about this, what it does is it creates a pathway that people can follow in the footsteps of, and that drives change. You only need, all the change research shows you only need about a third of people. You only need 10% to start to tip it, and you only need a third. You don't have to convince everybody. You need about a third before culture shifts. Not that long ago, we strapped children when we had behavior problems, and children who were neurodivergent. We wouldn't have used that language, but we strapped them for the behavior. Now, most people would not go back to that. But that was only the 1980s. And that shift did not occur because of research, although now people would talk a lot about the research. That key shift changed in the end because of a stroppy mom who took it to the courts, and there was a legal decision around it. I tell a lot of those stories under other circumstances. I tell those stories of change so that we can see how change happens. And there are moments in which the culture shifts. And then, what are we, 40 years down the line? Most people would now be horrified by what was standard and normal in Scottish schools up until the 1980s. In fact, Carol Craig, who's an author who's written about adverse childhood experiences in Scotland, thinks that we were the harshest, most violent culture in Europe, here in Scotland. That we so casually hit children with the strap that we just didn't think about it. And so if Scotland has gone, if that is true, we have shifted since 1987 to ACE-aware, nurturing culture. That's celebratory. That's remarkable. We need to think about how that shift happened. That's a long-winded answer to your question, but I hope.
Okay, I'm very aware of time, and I know that some people may have meetings at 2 o'clock. So, but do we have maybe one more question, and then we will draw to a close? Or... Yeah.
I think you said you felt there was something that was missing, and that portions believe there's something. It seems at a time that academia used to be much more, say, institutions that something more business, like sort of standardized. Like what's yours? What's changes you think academia needs to be?
Oh, that's a brilliant question. Nobody's ever asked me that question. I think we need more curiosity as academics. I think everybody needs more curiosity, but I think the academics need more curiosity as well. What happened? I work with lots of different groups. Okay, and what I have discovered is that those groups, they hang out with other people in their groups, and then that kind of becomes your world. So if I talk to teachers, they hang out with other teachers. They often have friends with teachers. They spend the whole day in a school. So they have lots of schools will have no idea you exist. They will feel super proud that I came and told you about them today, because they will feel hassled by Ofsted. They didn't get a very good inspection last time, and they feel bad about themselves as a community. So if I am talking about the fact that I see value in what they're doing, that has an impact. Okay. Police are interested in this, but they often have no way of talking to researchers or to school leaders. So if all of the people in those communities, those professional communities, can get more curious about what it is like in other communities, then we see opportunities for shifting. And I think the same for academia. You're here because you like research. You're here because you like debating theoretical ideas. I presume you're here also because you're trying to think about how to get that research used out there. there are lots of people, it's important to remember that there are lots of people who, if you say a psychological model or a scientific model, they don't know what you're talking about and they start to be scared by it. There are lots of people who can't read graphs. And so when I'm doing a graph, I talk to it really carefully with a tone that implies it's okay if you don't understand this. So I guess what I'm trying to say is it's easy to forget what people out there don't know and what they're not confident about. And the more we can be curious about what people don't know and when I say that, and I'll make it be the last thing I say, I love this, I mean, I call it science. I think baby's capacities and despite what we have discovered is profound and fascinating. That will never leave me. So I really speak as a scientist. When people are able to understand that science, I think that's what we are trying to serve. And I'm proud of that. And where you can get more of that kind of curiosity going on, that it serves the activity that all of us understand. I tell you what, I will stick around and thank you so much for having me.
All things to close just now. Thank you so much all for coming, and it's really wonderful. Thank you.
And I'm here, if you have more questions that you think would ask, I'm here.